Thank you, Dan. It is a pleasure to be here, and I certainly appreciate your kind words. I've gotten hundreds of congratulatory emails and phone calls since I announced I was leaving town. And actually, if I knew people were going to be this nice to me, I would have left a long time ago. But, you know, it's kind of like going to your own funeral, except I'm not dead. So it's a great combination there. Going to D.C. was actually a very tough decision because I really love Brown. I'm going to miss all the people around here. Brown has been a terrific place for me, both personally and professionally, and I'm certainly grateful for all the opportunities that I have had here. But I started at Brookings as a research fellow back in 1980, so I'm returning to my original roots and looking forward to participating in the national political dialogue. And I'm telling you right now that if things get better next year in this country, I'm going to claim personal credit. Now, people have asked me how I actually got the job at Brookings, and I have to say I had a rather unconventional interview with Strobe Talbot, who's the president of Brookings. There actually were 3 candidates. The first candidate came in and Strobe asked him, "What's 2 plus 2?" This candidate said 4. And Strobe said, "Sorry, that's not exactly what I'm looking for." Second candidate came in, again Strobe asked, "What's 2 plus 2?" Now, this candidate was very clever, and she said 4.0. But again, Strobe said, "Sorry, that's not what I'm looking for." I was the third candidate. Strobe came in, said, "What's 2 plus 2?" And when I said, "What would you like it to be?" he hired me. So I knew all that Rhode Island training would come in handy someday. I mean, I always felt like I've been attending the John Salona School of Employment Training for a while. Speaking of John Salona, I had an only in Rhode Island moment this week. I was called by the producer for Buddy Sancy's radio talk show, and they wanted me to talk about the presidential campaign. So I said, sure, I'll go on. This is just a couple of days ago. But it was right after the CVS verdict had come out and Mike Stinton had done an article in the newspaper. And so I go on the radio with Buddy, and he doesn't ask me anything about the presidential campaign. It's all about this corruption trial. And Buddy, you know, is very knowledgeable about rules of evidence, jury instructions, and so on. And I was thinking to myself, you know, this is an only in Rhode Island moment when I'm doing commentary on a corruption trial with a convicted felon. Please don't tell him I said that story because I might be on a show again sometime in the next 3 weeks. What I'd like to do today is talk about the 2008 American presidential campaign, discuss how the campaign is shaping up. I'm going to give you my prediction on who I think is going to win. If I turn out to be wrong, I'm just going to claim that I was misquoted. And after all, I am leaving town in 3 weeks anyway, so it really doesn't matter to me personally. I will try and keep my talk reasonably brief to give you a time to ask any questions or make any comments that you would like. I do think that the 2008 election is shaping up as one of the most important elections in American history. There's actually been a tremendous amount of political change taking place all around the world. I mean, Germany has a new chancellor, France has elected a new president, Great Britain has a new prime minister, Russia has a new president, although that's an asterisk because it's the same regime, and George Bush is going to leave office in, what, 7 months or so. Dan, I think this is a Democratic audience. You obviously have failed during your term of office. But you know, when you think about it, it really is a major turning point in terms of world leadership, because rarely in a short period of time have you seen that much political turnover in so many major countries around the world. I think when we look at the 2008 election, there are 2 important factors that are conditioning what has happened and what will happen in this election. The most important factor has been the development of Bush fatigue, that basically after 8 years, Americans are tired of the Bush administration. They're no longer happy with foreign or domestic policy. Many Americans no longer support the war. More than 2/3 of Americans now say they believe the nation is headed in the wrong direction. Now, this is not an unusual development. If you go back to 1999 and 2000, we had the same phenomenon. Clinton fatigue. And basically, at that point, people were tired of both Clintons. And it's one of the reasons that helped elect George Bush president in 2000. It's one of the reasons we often alternate parties in power in the United States, that when we get sick of one party, then we give the other party a chance. The other big development has been our country's weakening economy. We are either in negative GDP growth in the first 6 months of this year or very close to it. The numbers have been relatively flat, at least in the first 3 months. This is making Americans even more hostile to the Bush administration than was true before. One of the strongest historical factors affecting American elections is this relationship between the state of the economy and how people vote. You can go back 100 years. There are academics who studied this in great detail. Generally, when the economy is not doing well, people bring in the out party. They blame the in party for the bad performance and give the other party a chance. And so between the Bush fatigue, the bad economy, and unhappiness with U.S. Iraq policy, all the signs are pointing to major Democratic victories in November. 2006 turned out to be a big Democratic year. Democrats recaptured control of the House and Senate. I think this year America is going to elect its first African-American president. And we are also probably going to increase the Democratic numbers in the House and Senate. But before those of you who are Democrats get too excited about this phenomena, the last time this happened, when we had a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate, you may remember, was 93 and 94, when Bill Clinton was not able to enact health care reform. So don't get your hopes up too high about what's going to come out after this election in terms of governance, because there's no money. Like, even if Barack Obama wants to do major things, until we get a handle on Iraq, that's where all of the money is going. I think it's no accident that we have had our most diverse field of presidential candidates in American history. I mean, after all, when you think about the field that has run this year, we've had a woman, a black, a Latino, a Mormon, a fundamentalist, a former POW. And if Rudy Giuliani had been elected president, we would have had our first president with who had 3 different wives. So that would have been historic as well. I think it's no accident that we have had our most diverse field and that we are on the verge of electing our first African-American president. You know, it's not like the white guys have been doing such a great job in governing over the last 8 years. I've often given my theory on Brown University presidents that the reason we got Ruth Simmons was Gordon Gee. Well, I think there's an analogy here that the reason we're going to get Barack Obama is George W. Bush. So I think in any event, it will be a historic election. The Democratic campaign against John McCain is going to come down to 3 words that you're going to hear a lot of. In fact, you started to hear it last night. Bush's third term. That's really going to be the Democratic campaign against McCain. They're basically going to say, if you like Bush's policies on Iraq, on taxes, and a range of other domestic issues, you should vote for John McCain. It's a smart strategy because, you know, this is a situation where only 15 to 20% of Americans now believe our country is headed in the right direction. So it's basically a change election. It's an anti-status quo type of election. So basically, the biggest criticism I have of John McCain right now in terms of the strategy that he's following is he is way too close to George W. Bush. Now, last night, those of you who heard McCain's speech, he, for the first time, is really starting to create distance between himself and Bush. He should have been doing that over the last 2 to 3 months. I understand in order to become the Republican nominee, he had to cozy up to conservatives and pretend to be a Bush clone. But, you know, even after he secured enough delegates to become the GOP nominee, last night was really the first night where he basically said, I'm not Bush. I differ with Bush on climate change, on energy policy, even on the president's management of the war. I think that's a smart speech for him to give. but it's getting late in the campaign. We're only 5 months away from the general election, and Democrats are basically going to say, that's all rhetoric. Look at the record. Look at his voting record in the Senate. Look at how he opposed Bush's tax cuts in 2001, but now has embraced them, that he talked the president into the military surge strategy after the elections. So there are going to be lots of arguments that basically come down to Democrats saying, if you like Bush, elect John McCain. The DNC already has started to run campaign ads against McCain, and one of my favorite ads, you haven't seen it yet in Rhode Island, is a picture showing John McCain hugging George Bush. This is in the 2004 presidential campaign when McCain endorsed him, and there's a prominent moment where Bush is on stage, John McCain comes out, endorses him, and hugs him. And I don't know if this took place at the same event or whether it was a different event, but this ad also shows footage of Bush kissing McCain on the forehead. And so in the ad business, we call this the hug and the kiss ad. And you're going to see a lot of Valentine hearts connecting Bush and McCain in this campaign. Basically, Democrats are going to try and turn them into Siamese twins. Now, I do believe that Republicans have nominated their strongest candidate. In general, I don't think the Republican field was that strong overall, but they actually did pick the individual who has the best chance of winning in November. McCain is someone who throughout his career and also in this particular election is the one who has run best among independents. Independents comprise about 40% of the overall electorate nationally. They are the swing voters. They're the people who really decide things. And so in choosing someone who has been a bit of a maverick Republican, they chose their strongest nominee, somebody who could be competitive among independents. McCain also has a great deal of authenticity. He has the life story that's very compelling. He's a strong and honest leader. He has outstanding foreign policy credentials. And so I think it's going to be a tough and competitive campaign, even though I believe Barack Obama is going to triumph in the end. I don't think it's going to be a runaway election. I think it'll be competitive between the two of them. But I do believe Barack Obama is going to be favored in the fall because of the bad economy, the unpopular war, and a president with very low job approval ratings. The Republican campaign against Obama is, and again, those of you who saw McCain's speech last night, you basically saw the blueprint that they are going to follow. They're going to say Obama is inexperienced, he is weak on foreign policy. We heard McCain talking last night about big government, that Obama is a guy who basically thinks the government can solve everybody's problems, that he's basically a tax and spend liberal. Those of you who recall the 1988 presidential campaign between George Herbert Walker Bush and Michael Dukakis, where Bush basically ran against Dukakis that he was too extreme, he was out of the mainstream, he was a tax and spend liberal, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be the Republican strategy. And so I think it's very important for Obama in his very first choice, which is his vice president, to pick somebody who is strong and compelling, and in particular, somebody who has good foreign policy credentials. I think the biggest uncertainty of this campaign is whether the election is going to be decided based on the domestic economy or on foreign policy. I think it matters a lot which of those agenda issues really emerge as most important. I think if the election does center on the domestic economy, basically it will be a strong Democratic year. I think McCain's strong suit is really foreign policy, which is one of the reasons he is contrasting that. He's saying, hey, I've been to Iraq. Barack Obama has never visited Iraq. He doesn't know what's going on there. He doesn't know the generals. He doesn't know what things look like on the front line. I'm not convinced that foreign policy is going to be a huge plus for Republicans, but there still are many Americans who believe the world is a dark and dangerous place, and there are people out there who want to kill us. And it's not like that's an illegitimate viewpoint. There are people who hate America. And of course, the biggest unpredictable aspect of this election is the risk of an October surprise, and whether something happens either in the foreign policy realm, in Iraq, a domestic terrorist attack. I mean, you know, there could be surprises of varying sorts, and how that would affect voters. You know, if we had, say, you know, we've been fortunate, we've not had a terrorist attack here in 7 years. What happens if we do have one? Osama bin Laden is probably sitting over there someplace in Afghanistan or Pakistan thinking, hey, I can be the kingmaker in this election. I can decide who will be the next American president. But, you know, it's just one of those unpredictable events that it's really hard to know in advance how that would play out. And I think it really would come down to the details and the particulars. In Spain, when there was a terrorist attack a few weeks before their national election a few years ago, the In party was blamed for that and booted out of office. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee that Republicans would win in that type of situation, but it does add an element of volatility to an election that already has been very surprising. So in conclusion, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments that you have. I do believe there will be a Democratic president after November. I think America is going to make history and elect its first African-American president. And I think this is going to send a very powerful signal all around the world that America is serious about change and plans to move in a different direction. And I think many people around the world don't think that we're capable of doing what I think we are about to do. So it's going to be an interesting thing, not just for America to deal with, but for countries around the world. So why don't I stop at this point? I'd be happy to take any questions or comments that you have. If you want to argue, you know, I've been arguing with Brown University students for 26 years, so I'm happy to go out with arguments too. Yes, sir. I think it's never going to happen. I mean, people have been talking about this unity ticket. Some people refer to it as a dream ticket. I think it would actually be a nightmare ticket myself. But I think it would be too risky for Barack Obama, because the Clintons are still fairly popular among Democrats, but you know, when you move to a general election setting where you are dealing with independents and Republicans, the Clintons are much more controversial. And of course, you know, the problem with getting Hillary is it's a 2-for-1 deal. You also get Bill. What happens if he starts dating again? You know, I mean, it could be very problematic. The last time we had that type of unity ticket was really in 1960 with Kennedy and Johnson. But, you know, in those days, the VP job was really a nothing job. I mean, the major the major responsibility of the vice president then was to attend foreign funerals. And so basically, you know, you'd send them to Venezuela, and you'd send them to Chile, and send them to other places around the world. But, you know, recent presidents always have chosen somebody who can exercise a strong policy-making role. Cheney certainly has been very decisive and very influential behind the scenes for Bush. Al Gore was very influential for Bill Clinton, and I just don't believe that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama would have the type of close working relationship that a current president would demand. You asked that question. There's kind of a conventional list of people, and then there's a surprise name that I will give you as well, although I think it's very plausible and it would satisfy the criteria that I think Barack Obama is going to consider. The conventional list of names would be, you know, Governor Richardson of New Mexico. He'd be the first Latino VP if he were on the ticket. John Edwards, because he represents North Carolina, which you know, as a swing state and a border southern state, Democrats are hopeful that they could be competitive there. Evan Bayh, a senator from Indiana, certainly would be a possibility. If Ted Strickland, the governor of Ohio, had not endorsed Hillary Clinton and done an ad on her, he would be on the short list. I'm not sure Obama is going to be willing to overlook that. The governor of Kansas, Kathleen Sebelius, if he decides to go for a woman, although I think if he spurns Hillary, the prospects of adding a different woman to the ticket drops dramatically. So I would be surprised if he went that route. Joe Biden, the senator from Delaware, certainly would be on that short list. The unconventional name that I would also throw out, and people are always surprised when I say that, and this is not just homerism on my part, is Jack Reed. Because of his strong military and defense background. I mean, in D.C., he has really become the go-to guy on defense and military issues. I mean, he's visited Iraq, I think, a dozen times. You know, he knows the generals. He really knows the Pentagon probably better than any other sitting member of the Senate. Now, people say, you know, Rhode Island is too small. You know, there's no way, you know, somebody from our state could become vice president. Dick Cheney came from Wyoming. Wyoming actually has fewer electoral college votes. They have 3, we have 4. So I don't think it's out of the question. I think Obama does have to bring somebody to the ticket who is very strong on military and foreign policy issues. And I think, and he also needs somebody who's just strong, competent, knowledgeable, and experienced to kind of address what is going to be the Republican onslaught on him this fall. He'll pick somebody younger. By definition, that includes anybody. I think McCain is most likely to go for a sitting governor. This is actually an unusual election in that both parties nominated sitting members of the Senate. What makes it unusual is, you know, this is an environment where, you know, more than 3/4 of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction, and they hate Washington, D.C. And so what do we turn around and do? We nominated 2 Senate incumbents. You know, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, but, you know, that's our choice. And so 4 of the last 5 presidents have actually been governors. There's a long history over the last 20 to 25 years of basically going with governors because they come from outside of Washington, they have executive experience. You know, a lot of the policy innovation across America today is taking place at the state level, not the national level. So individuals who I think McCain will take a close look at would include Charlie Crist, the current governor of Florida, Mark Sanford, the governor of South Carolina, Tim Pawlenty, the governor of Minnesota. I think the one thing you have to keep in mind about the vice presidential sweepstakes is, you know, McCain has already started to do these events where he brings people out to the ranch or other places and kind of promotes them. Generally, the people who show up first are the least likely to be chosen. And so who shows up first? Mitt Romney. No way is he picking him. Because all of the Republican presidential candidates hated Romney because Romney had so much money. He spent like $50 million of his own money. The only thing that forced him out of the race is his wife finally took the checkbook away. And, you know, every time another Republican started to gain a little bit of traction, it's like, boom, Romney would run an attack ad against them. So basically, they all hate Romney, and I don't think he will end up on the ticket. So. Bobby Jindal, a great graduate of Brown University. You know, if he were chosen and became a vice president, would make history by being America's first Indian American president. But Bobby Jindal, I believe, is 36 years old. I don't think John McCain can spend the next 5 months telling America that Barack Obama is too inexperienced to become president and have Bobby Jindal standing at his side. One of the most surprising things about the primary campaign was that Hillary Clinton was able to portray Barack Obama as an elitist. I mean, given his personal background and you know, the family situation that you described, you know, he is somebody who really worked his way up against pretty substantial odds. And even though, you know, he went to Harvard and became, you know, the first African-American editor of the Harvard Law Review, you know, he has a compelling personal story. He needs to do a better job promoting that story. It actually reminds me of the situation that Bill and Hillary Clinton were in 1992, where public opinion polls, like the Clintons came across as just, so ambitious and kind of upwardly striving individuals that Americans didn't realize they even had kids. There were public opinion surveys that thought they were a childless couple, and that somehow, this was the way that people were seeing them. And so Bill and Hillary spent part of the general election then introducing America to the story, the kid from Hope. And you may recall the video at the '92 Democratic Convention. That was a major part of the sales pitch. And I think Barack Obama needs to do that. Even though, to those of us who follow this presidential campaign, which seems to have gone on endlessly, Mitt Romney ran his first ad in February of 2007. You have to keep in mind, there still are a lot of Americans who really don't know very much about Barack Obama. I mean, obviously, they know the name and they know a little bit about him and they know he's a rock star. But Obama should not assume that Americans know all of the details, because, there are a lot of Americans that do not pay attention to American politics. He has, the next 2 months leading up to the convention are absolutely crucial. He needs to basically assume the campaign has not taken place. He has to reintroduce himself, and he has to define himself before Republicans try and define him in a negative direction. When I run into him in D.C., that'll be the first thing I tell him. But Joe and Emily were classmates, so they can tell him too. So, over here. Well, I would not accept that argument. I think that what's unusual about this election, this is really what I would call a message election. It's an unusual election because there's so many really big issues on the agenda. I mean, you have the economy, the Iraq War, questions about health care and education, whether we extend the Bush tax cuts into the future. I mean, all of those are issues that have dramatic consequences for each and every American. If you just do an issue profile of Obama versus McCain, I cannot recall an election where there were as many fundamental differences between the parties as what we're going to see this fall. So I think voters actually, understand that. We've had record turnouts in virtually every primary state that has voted this year. One of the greatest things has been the engagement of young people in this election. So I would just tell that person he or she is wrong. You can quote me as the authority on saying that. You don't fool around, do you? I bet oral arguments were really tough in the courtroom. There's a classic strategy for dealing with divided societies, which is basically decentralization and diffusion of power. If you kind of think about how we handled Germany and Japan after World War II, first of all, we did not let them write their constitutions. We wrote the constitutions for them, and we actually did a pretty good job writing a fairly fair constitution. I think the biggest mistake we made in Iraq, we let them write their own constitution. They did not write a fair constitution. There were some people who would do well. There are many people, mainly Sunnis, who would have a life of poverty and powerlessness. And so what do those people do? They pick up arms, and you end up with a civil war in that situation. And so the classic way to deal with a society when there are a lot of divisions like that is to basically decentralize the power. The problem, though, in Iraq is if you decentralize the power, the oil money is unequally distributed across the regions. And so that has been the big barrier. I mean, we've tried to decentralize power, but the real internal domestic issue that still roils Iraqi society is who gets the oil money. It's all about resource allocation. And so if I were giving advice, somehow we have to solve that problem. It's an internal domestic politics problem within Iraq, and I don't know how we do that. I think we are going to basically turn over the responsibilities. I think Barack Obama is serious about basically doing a phased withdrawal of American troops over a 6 to 9 month period, but it's not going to be easy. I think one of the ways in which Democrats have been a little disingenuous in this campaign is to basically make the argument that we can just pull the troops out, we can walk away, and we don't have to worry about what happens. There are a lot of bad things that could happen that would make whoever that Democratic president is at that time look really bad. The American public is capable of turning on a dime. There's a lot of complexity in American public opinion towards the war. So, you know, it's going to be a very complicated issue, and it's one of the reasons why I think Obama really needs a VP who understands military issues, so that when we do start to phase the troops out, that we do so in a way that doesn't create a disaster both for America and Iraq. I think this has been a new media election. I mean, people often refer to 1960 as the first television election. I think 2008 has been the first digital election. Barack Obama was an innovator in this area in the sense that he used social networking sites as an organizing tool. He democratized fundraising. You know, his average he raised money from 1.5 million individuals in this country, which is an all-time record. And he was able, and his average contribution, I think, was like $186. So he got a lot of contributions in $25, $50, and $100 segments. And technology was a big part of that story. One of my areas, as Dan was pointing out in his introduction, actually is technology policy. One of the things I want to do in Washington is to really get people to kind of move from thinking about technology in a campaign setting to using technology in more innovative ways to become more efficient, effective, and responsive in the governing process. There's a whole kind of electronic government, phenomena. Many of you are probably starting to file taxes online, and there are kind of lots of ways in which digital technologies are starting to transform government. So I certainly want to help encourage that development. Well, I can only answer that question if David Cicilline steps out of the room for a minute. Only kidding, Mr. Mayor. I think, Charlie Bax tried to pin me down on this question a few weeks ago, and I took the Fifth Amendment because it's a very unpredictable situation because we don't know who the candidates are going to be. We don't know what the political environment is going to be. Lincoln Chafee is certainly a big factor, whether he runs for governor, and if he runs as an independent, then it's a three-way race, and it means that, if you end up with fairly strong Democratic, Republican, and an independent candidates, somebody can win with 40%. And so I would assess the Democratic field. I think the two strongest Democrats right now are the mayor and Frank Caprio, in part because of each of them have done a tremendous job on fundraising. I think Elizabeth Roberts has excellent potential because sometimes in contested Democratic primaries, when two candidates with a lot of money go on the attack against one another, the beneficiary becomes a third candidate who doesn't go negative to the same extent because they often are underfunded, but then become the beneficiary of that. Patrick Lynch may run as well. I think the most likely Republican candidate is Steve Laffey. He's basically the only one who is announcing. A lot of people think he's too divisive and contentious to be elected. And he is divisive and contentious, but he actually has the perfect public opinion climate. I mean, in our survey, our February survey, we found that the wrong track number in Rhode Island was basically 3/4 believe that Rhode Island is headed in the wrong direction. That's the worst number we have seen since the early days of the banking crisis. Oftentimes when so many people believe the state is headed in the wrong direction, that's when they turn to a tough-minded, opinionated leader who can basically say, I can turn things around. So that will certainly be the Laffey campaign. And then you have Lincoln Chafee. So I would not make any predictions in that race, but it's certainly something I will pay close attention to even after I leave Rhode Island, because I'm very interested in the outcome and seeing what will happen. So I will be a regular visitor to projo.com. Let me just give you the brief history on superdelegates in terms of the reason the Democratic Party created them. Superdelegates go back to the 1984 presidential election, which was basically the first nominating battle in the post-Jimmy Carter world. Carter was this guy, came out of nowhere in '76, ran against the party establishment. Party leaders really hated him, but you know, he was able to kind of sweep through the primaries, get the nomination, eventually go on to become president. And then at that time, he's actually been one of our most successful former presidents because of all the good deeds that he has done. But at the time, you know, he ended up losing to Reagan in 1980, and he was viewed as pretty much a failed president. And so the conclusion that Democrats drew from the Carter experience was that we should not just have a process where voters pick all the delegates. And so they set aside this category of superdelegates, which is basically party leaders and elected officials. I think they set aside 15% of all the delegates to the National Nominating Convention and gave them guaranteed seats. They wanted those individuals to basically bring a peer review element to the process, to basically not just follow public opinion, because it was kind of like our founders, you know, not trusting the public to make wise decisions. They wanted elites and peers and people who served with these candidates as governors in the House and in the U.S. Senate to exercise their independent judgment. And so now we have a situation where in this year, you know, typically what the superdelegates do doesn't really attract that much attention because most nominating contests aren't as competitive. But this year, you know, we just happened to have hit the lottery and had, you know, the most competitive nomination battle in a long time. And so this year, the superdelegates really did matter. And in the end, they actually decided this. Because if you look at the superdelegates who announced before Super Tuesday, in the first week in February, Hillary Clinton won that group by about a 2-to-1 margin. I mean, most of the peer review was in her favor. But if you look at those who have announced in the last 1 to 2 months, it's really flipped the other way. By a more than 2-to-1 margin, those superdelegates who've come out have endorsed Obama. So that turned out to be the crucial margin for him. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing depends on your conception of democracy, whether you are a direct democracy person or a representative democracy person, because that's really the philosophical debate that exists around them. I think it would be incredibly stupid on Obama's part to do that, because first of all, she can make that promise, but, you know. I personally would not trust her or anybody else in that situation. But I also don't think, you know, it's kind of like playing games, and I think this is far too serious for any gamesmanship. I mean, he should choose who he thinks would be the best vice president, period. And I think he will do that. I don't think it's going to be her. I think he did give a hint last night about what he might do. You may recall, those of you who stayed up late to watch his speech, that he had this Abraham Lincoln reference where, you know, Lincoln was involved in a four-way race for the president in 1861, and basically because of the Civil War, he brought his former political adversaries into the cabinet. And so in telling that story, he seemed to be suggesting that he would offer, he'd be happy if she was willing to serve in the cabinet. Now, he is smart enough to know that that's an offer that he could make that she would turn down, because to become a cabinet officer, she would have to give up her New York Senate seat, which personally I think would be craziness on her part. You know, she could basically serve in the U.S. Senate for the rest of her life and basically become the replacement for Ted Kennedy, basically someone of great national standing who can speak out on issues of the day, who kind of knows the rules and, you know, has the respect of her peers. So I think that is more likely to happen, you know, a cabinet offer as opposed to a VP-ship. No. I mean, Nader is running. Nobody's going to pay any attention to him this year. Bob Barr is running. Nobody's going to pay attention to him. I don't really see third parties being influential in this election. He has to do it through policy announcements. I mean, you can't just say that you're in favor of change and then embrace the agenda of the person who's been president for the last 8 years. So we've already seen some significant policy changes that I think are important. I mean, for example, one of McCain's first ads has been on climate change and global warming, and basically breaking with the administration that until quite recently basically said, you know, this is not a problem and we don't really need to address it. McCain has said, this is a problem and we do need to address it. So I think that's the type of thing that he could do that would enhance his credibility in making the change argument. And I think he will do more of that. But he still has the big problem of Iraq and taxes, because those issues, which are kind of more central than climate change on the political agenda, he has embraced the Bush agenda. So I think that, you know, will kind of undermine his credibility in making the change argument. The reason nobody's discussing Social Security is Bush tried to reform Social Security after 2004 and failed completely. So basically, our national government is in the same situation we were with health care after the Clinton health care reform failed in 93 and 94. It's like once somebody, you know, really makes a major effort to change something and fails in the process for a variety of differing reasons, it generally is like another 10 years before somebody can go back and address that issue. On raising taxes, basically nobody is really talking about raising taxes this year, with the exception of Barack Obama on those who make over $200,000. And if there's anybody in this room that would be affected by that proposal, I'd like to talk to you afterwards, and perhaps you'd like to contribute to the Brookings Institution. But other than that, you know, Barack Obama is not talking about kind of large-scale tax increases across the board, and if anything, he's still talking about, you know, some tax cuts for the middle class. And so, in that respect, it also illustrates the problems Democrats are going to face, because, like, you know, Obama and Clinton both talked about, you know, universal health care, and we want to do better on education, we want to do this and that. There's no money to do that, in part because of Iraq, but also because nobody is coming out and talking about raising taxes. And there's nothing in this campaign that's really going to change that dynamic. And so, one thing that I'll be watching in Washington is, you know, what happens after the election. I think Democrats are going to face a huge governing problem because there's no money, the exit from Iraq is going to be very messy, and the 2010 elections are going to be coming up fast, and oftentimes, you know, even after a party does well in a presidential year election, they are then vulnerable in the following midterm year election. Mr. Mayor. It should be a key issue because we have probably 3 justices who are close to retirement, and so the next president is going to have extraordinary power to reshape the U.S. Supreme Court. But as you point out, it's not an issue that has attracted very much attention this time. But if you go back to 92, 96, 2000, 2004, when the potential for the Supreme Court to be an important issue, it never materialized in those elections. It's just one of those issues that's very important, but almost never rises to the level of being a crucial issue in the election. So I don't really see any reason why 08 is going to be different in that regard, in part because it's being crowded out by all the other big issues: Iraq, the economy, taxes, and healthcare. Those, I think, are going to be the big issues. He actually has been one of the most successful former candidates that we've ever seen, in the sense that, you know, when the presidential bid failed in 2000, mainly because he didn't carry his home state. Like, if he'd carried Tennessee, it wouldn't have mattered what happened in Florida. But you know, he went the advocacy route, did the documentary, and really kind of repositioned himself as someone who really reshaped our consciousness on the issue of climate change. So I think he certainly brings a lot of power and a lot of credibility to the process. I don't see him as being decisive in a general election context because, you know, when he endorses Obama, people just say, well, yeah, he's a Democrat, so, you know, there's no big news value to that. I think Obama will use Gore and Hillary and Bill Clinton to help reinforce the Democratic base. I could see Obama playing more to the independents and then using some of the traditional Democrats to increase turnout in key states. I think we're getting close to exhausting the audience. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.